In this episode of the podcast, I spoke with Alex. Alex, a producer, a director, a screenwriter, and has now written a book. And we get into just basically how it started and where it's finished. And I hope you love the episode. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for bearing with the technical issues as we exit out and restart again. But apart from that, how's your day going?
It's going well. It's a gray, rainy spring day in Brooklyn. It's nice.
Yeah. Do you know that's because we in the UK right now are having this very strange spring where it's 20 degrees, 21 degrees outside and it's blue skies, and it's been like this now for a couple of weeks. And by now, really, this time of the year, we should be under a foot of water. And it's just it's like normally that's a prelude to we're going to have the wettest, shittiest summer going.
Yeah, I it's been we had a really dry early spring, and now we have 7 days of rain to look forward to here. So right now it's charming. It's the first of the seven.
Yeah,
By the seventh day, I'll be ready for some sun.
because I think you guys in New York have a similar sort of weather pattern to the UK in that it's quite wet. You don't really plan for a nice summer as such, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it'll well you can plan,
Yeah,
but it might not be. It'll be yeah it can get a very hot here in the summer in the city. But it's also nice because the people of means leave the city, and the people without means like me have some time to have a little room to stretch in the summer.
okay.
So that's
Yeah,
always nice.
no, that is nice. That is nice. So we're going to get into your book. Is this your first book?
Mhm.
Second book, third book? Is this?
It's my first novel. Yeah, I've been a professional screenwriter for about 10 years. But previous to that, I was a producer, a commercial producer, and a documentary producer. I was always writing, but I didn't break through until about 10 years ago in terms of my screenplay work and my film work. And but this is my first novel. Yeah, I've started plenty, but this is the first one that I completed and published. Yes.
So what prompted the now's the time?
Well, it's a little explanation about being a working screenwriter is that you can have a career in Hollywood at the studio level, and your work doesn't get made.
Yeah.
You could I started off on the independent side. I wrote and directed my first features called Two Step, which is this kind of Texas noir, this kind of Coen Brothers-esque revenge film. And then I went to the studio level, and it's what happens is you either write something on spec, a speculative work that you do, nobody pays you, and then somebody buys it, or there are assignments and you go out and you pitch. It's like anything where you present yourself as the best option for the work. But the reality is, each studio makes probably about, I don't know, 5 movies a year,
Yeah.
and there's less and less studios now. But they purchase a lot more than that, and whether it's to potentially make or to keep others from making, but they'll do that. And in the United States, screenwriters lose their copyright when they make a sale. So the copyright goes to the studio. So you create these worlds, you fall in love with these characters, and if your movie isn't made, you lose them. You
Mm.
lose these characters. So that started to get a little frustrating to me. Um, I initially didn't intend to write this as a book. I thought I would write it as a TV series, and somewhere in the process of my writing, I had this thing that I do called a spillage. A lot of writers do it, where you just have a main document that you make a deal with yourself that you're not going to erase anything. It's the idea document, right? Any stupid idea is still a good idea. You cannot delete it. Um, they'll spark other ideas. And at some point, I slipped into first person narration in this spillage page for this potential TV series. And I enjoyed it. And I'd never done it before. And in screenwriting, you don't really do that. You can have narration, but it's not frequent. And I just found it intoxicating. Um, and the more notes I was taking on the story, the more it started to feel like a novel to me. So I just thought yeah, let's do it. But there's so much weight on the concept of a novel um that, any writer, anyone really, but especially in the arts, you're constantly dealing with some sort of imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
about how you feel about your own work, right? And there's so much weight on the novel that there was a lot of that pressing down that I had to push through. But yeah, I write to tell stories for people to, yeah, I want the people to hear them and to experience them. Um, it's I understand the business, but at some point, I would rather the world get a chance to read the book as opposed to an executive in a corner office, who just goes, yeah, it's great, and then puts it to the side. I want other people to read it. I want my work out there. So it seemed like the time to do it. So I did it.
Do you know, I always interested to a point of fascination by the self torture, because I imagine it to be worse for you and for people, like, because you've worked the industry, so you kind of see the good, the bad, the negative, and all of those things, and the necessity. So you understand the business framework. If we don't come up with ideas, and if these ideas don't sell, and if these ideas don't get produced, and if they're not successful, none of us exist. But then like you say, you drift in a sense from, well, this is what I normally do, but oh, I've somehow started writing this in the first person. It then, like raising a child in a sense, you become invested in the outcome and it becomes very precious. And then when it's finally finished, you're like, who the hell do you think I am? Do I think I am that I can write a book?
Oh God, absolutely. I mean,
It's a fascinating
and
roller coaster of how can I make my life worse?
well, there's some what I have found as a professional. Hate to use the phrase like professional writer, professional whatever. It sounds even that makes me
Yeah,
cringe.
yeah,
Like, what am I saying? You know, it's a world of doors. You keep thinking you're like, I got through. It's like, oh, I made my first feature. Yay, I got to get into a film festival. Boom, I got into South by Southwest. Okay, now I need to get good reviews. Oh my gosh, I got great reviews. Now we need to get it distributed. Okay, it's out there. Now I need a New York Times review. I got a great New York Times review. I'm a New York Times critic pick. And now I need whatever. I need people to go see it. Oh, nobody saw it or whatever. But there's just a door and a door and a door.
yeah,
There's always like that. And so with the writing, there was that as well, where it was like, okay, I wrote it. Then I did have all my reader friends reading it. I'm getting creative criticism. I'm getting criticism about 1998 because the book is a period piece. So I have people that were there that knew me then are just like, well, that's not. I don't. I didn't call it that, and so
yeah,
balancing all that. Then you write the book. Then you get copy edited, which is a whole other world of torture where you get your document back and you're just like, this document contains 1,250 notes,
yeah,
and you're just like, what? And you got to decide on each one. Is that a worthy note? Do I want to rework it? Do I want to ignore it? And then, my God, the concept of getting blurbs, like having to go out and get other authors that maybe I knew or
mhm,
people I knew, that I've crossed paths with, some I don't know that I just wrote too coldly. But you get one blurb back and it's just like I got one blurb because you figure you get like 5 to 10% of the people you ask might say yes. And
yeah,
then even not all of those will finish the book on because you have a deadline and you need them to read it by the deadline. But that was a whole other new world of torture. The blurbs would come in and they would be fantastic. And I just immediately get nauseous about the other blurbs that I'm waiting on. I'd be like, okay, great, I got that one. Now, what about I need this one? I need him to come through for me. Um, and And now it's the same thing. I'm a little better now. The book has been received well, and it's I'm a little calmer about it now,
Mm.
about feeling like, what did you think? Who do you think you were writing a novel? But it'll fade, and I'll feel like an idiot again, and then
Yeah.
and I'm start writing the next one and
Well,
feel like I have no
you,
talent at all.
you said something a couple of minutes ago. You was like, I'm a professional writer. And as soon as I say I'm a professional writer, I think, who the hell do I think I am? Yet,
Mhm.
if you had a leak in where you're living today and the plumber turned up and you started talking to the plumber would say, hey, I'm a professional, mate. I know my job.
Right,
And he wouldn't
right, right.
hesitate to point out that he's a professional.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this is
Hmm.
this funny thing about arts is people are in this, they make a living, they've been paid. It's what they're doing as a job. I'm a professional writer. What does that mean? I don't really want to talk about it.
I don't, yeah, I don't, I'm having a bad day. I don't want to talk about
Yeah,
it.
but no,
It's
a
so,
plum.
it's, it's so strange. I don't know why we
No,
do this to ourselves.
I think there's
Uh,
because the bar of measurement isn't real. Because you could do something excellent and it just doesn't get picked up the same way something else gets picked up and suddenly goes viral, smashes a box office, sells, gets great reviews, and you could do something equally as good as if not better, and it just doesn't catch the attention for whatever reason. And I always remember, it popped into my head. I think it was David Hasselhoff was talking about when he was doing something. I think it was one of his tracks, one of his songs, or something like that. And I think it was a concert in Berlin when I don't remember all the details, but at the same time that was happening, it was like, this is going to be amazing. The live police chase of O.J. Simpson was going on in town, and that's what
mm,
everybody was
hmm.
tuned into. So
Hmm.
it just. I think that was he was explaining why his music never took off in America, but it was really famous around Europe and Germany and stuff. Because just it's just like when he went to do something in the US, despite the fact he was already famous because of Night Ride and all that, the O.J. Simpson thing was live on TV when he was doing his thing, so
Yeah.
nobody watched him. And
I mean, even here, there was, on social media, I got off Twitter, but I'm attempting to do the blue sky thing. But somebody posted the meme of, that meme of "This is fine" with the person sitting there with the room on fire, and um, except they changed the phrasing of "This is fine" to "So I have a book coming out," where they're sitting in a room of fire, as it feels sometimes in America right now, and you're like, "Hey, I know
but I
a
think
lot
that
of stuff's going
but I think that
on."
the funny thing is I was talking to a chap this morning called Harold. I was lucky today. I have two podcasts. One was first thing this morning, and he's an American currently contracted in Afghanistan,
Mhm.
right? And
Wow.
yeah, and him and I were talking about the contrast between I'll complain about how my life is going.
Mhm.
He's watching kids go down the street with no shoes on their feet because no one's got any money over there, and yeah, we think we have problems in our countries,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and the biggest problem that we're all suffering right now is some person I've never met in another part of the country has a different opinion to me, but my
Mhm.
life has collapsed and imploded, and he's just like, I think I've really lost context on what's going on.
Right.
you know
Yeah, I mean, it's all context is everything. Yeah, I don't know, but I think that's also, and I think this ties back to it in the idea of that, without getting too heavy on it. I don't know, the arts at least in the United States, can be deemed frivolous. And I think that adds to the imposter syndrome in some ways, or the idea of "I'm a professional writer."
yeah.
Sometimes it's seemed as, it's extra. It'd be nice if you have the time, type of situation.
They can treat the arts the same here. You know,
Yeah.
it's. I remember when I wrote my first book, probably it was about a decade ago. It was the only book I ever started, finished, self-published. And I've never I tried a few manuscripts first, but to be honest with you, I prefer the sound of my voice to the look of my handwriting. It's but sometimes if somebody says something, I'll say, "Oh yeah, I've written a book," and it's a casual conversation because somebody mentions about writing. I'll say, "Yeah, no, I know a little bit about that because I've written blogs and I've written a book," and suddenly I'll feel really pretentious. But but they're the ones that's asked the question. But I
Yeah.
feel like I should dumb down and say, "No, I can't spell my own name. It's only got 5 letters, but I don't know how to spell it." Not that I wrote a novel. It's just
Yeah.
it's why do we do this?
I don't know. Because not a lot of people buy them, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
that's
yeah. No, no, not many people have bought it. I think I've bought more than anyone else. You know.
yeah, yeah. It's a strange. I mean, I don't know. It's so funny watching old movies and not that old, I think showing watching things with my son who's a teenager now, and I think we watched Vampire's Kiss, which is that kind of crazy kind of late 80s, early 90s Nicolas Cage, where
Oh wow.
he plays someone who thinks he's been turned into a vampire, but he actually hasn't. He's just going insane. But he's a book publisher. He's an editor or a book publisher or something, and he is presented like a rock star, like the 80s
Yes.
publisher, editor. It's just, the same thing. I think the Jack Nicholson movie Wolf
I
with
was just thinking of that because it's that publishing
they're just
house.
yeah, it's just so glamorous and exotic, and there's just, martinis at lunch, and it's the whole thing. It's hilarious how
They wielded real power as well. But publishing
yeah.
houses I think there's that point, isn't there, with cinema and the mythology behind it all, where the 70s and the 80s publishing houses, you were you everybody sort of yielded to your power. But if you were the head of the publishing house, you rocked. You were
Yeah.
you know you were kind of the intellectual version of a rock star.
Yeah, it was a power broker position, right? You
Yeah,
were you were having a say in how the America and this, at least here, and this and
yeah.
New York would go culturally. Like, what shall happen this year culturally, I will decide, type
Mm.
of thing.
Because you could have like banker trading rich. Yeah, but you're still a banker, so nobody appreciates you.
Hmm.
We all think you're scum. But if you were uh, publishing house rich, oh,
Hmm.
you're intelligent. You've defined culture.
Right.
You could be rich and a snob, a cultural
Yeah.
snob. It was, you know,
It's all fallen apart so quickly, David.
it has. So where did it start? What was growing up? Where did that happen for you?
Um, I'm from New York City originally. My parents are from Queens, and they grew up a block apart from each other. I have Ecuadorian mother and an Irish Danish father. He was second generation American. She was first generation American citizen. Um, so my dad was in the FBI.
Yeah,
So and one of the old things that Hoover kind of installed in the bureau that stayed, and I think might still be part of the bureau, I'm not sure, is that you couldn't get a raise unless you moved. So the idea was to try to keep you from ever getting local and, going native, whatever the horrible phrase is that he probably used. So you only stayed in places for short enough time that you mostly socialized with other FBI agent families, and you moved every 1 to 2 years, because you needed a raise. So we started in Queens, and then I was born in Manhattan. We started in Queens. I think we went to St. Louis, back to New York. Then he studied Hungarian at a military college in Monterey, because he was doing some counterintelligence stuff in New York. Came back to New York. We were in the suburbs for a little bit, and then he got transferred to headquarters in DC. And one thing that we luckily DC has both a field office and headquarters. So if he transferred between the field office and headquarters, it counted as a transfer. So my brother and I were able to go to the same high school, like for the same 4 years,
Yeah.
which my sister, my younger sister, went to, I think, three high schools. So that gave us some stability. So when I think about where I'm from, it's really New York and the DC area, really. So um, yeah, and then I went up to University of Vermont. I studied film theory, thought I would teach. I loved just having intense intellectual discussions about film. And then I worked on a movie that was in town, kind of fell in love with that. Then a bunch of NYU grad students came up and they were making a thesis film and became friends with them. I moved back to New York. I knew 20 grad students that all needed to make thesis films. I worked on all their films while I was temping,
Mm.
data entry stuff. And that's how I learned the nuts, literal nuts and bolts, how to open a C stand, how to tie a knot, how to drive a truck, how to do all the things you do in kind of like behind the scenes production. And somewhere in there, I got in producer track, and I was just better with the office stuff and
Yeah.
all that. My math teachers would die if they knew that I had a period of my life that involved Excel spreadsheets, but I did, and I was. I rose to the ranks, kind of like old school PA, assistant coordinator, production manager, line producer, producer, and then executive producer of a boutique doc production house in New York. Produced a few feature documentaries, produced hundreds of commercials, but I was
Yeah.
always writing screenplays, and couldn't really it's one of those things where you just don't know you see it and you just don't know how to get there. Um, Finally, I got, but part of the problem in film too is like nobody wants to be the first person to say you're good. Everyone's worried that you're not good.
Yeah.
So you need something, some legitimate, and that's kind of why the film industry has all these screenwriting contests, which many are just scams, but you can then put in the first paragraph of an intro email, or at the time, letter. Uh, I was nominated for the third place at the whatever and this and that. But at some point, I got into the Hampton screenwriting contest, screenwriting lab. They pick three scripts every year, and you get some mentorship, and that elevated me a little bit. But I found that in New York, none of the none of the production companies I was producing at necessarily wanted me to switch to writing and directing. They liked me as a producer, and they had
Yeah.
directors liked me as a producer, and they didn't want me to be doing something else. So I didn't find it so supportive at the time. My wife had an opportunity for work in Austin, in Texas, and we had a kid and a pit bull and a 600 square foot apartment, and started to think, yeah, maybe we should go somewhere different. And so we went to Austin, and while I was there, I kind of realized I had to do the thing that I used to hate. I used to hate when people would do this. Again, I don't know why I would hate this aggressively, but when people hadn't made a film and they called themselves filmmakers, or they had made a short film and they called themselves a filmmaker, I would always, I'd be at a bar or something and be like, what are you? And I'd be like, I produce really shitty industrials, like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
producing, I'm producing a pharma ad, or whatever. So, I would just be like, yeah, I'm unhappy with that. But um, I kind of was like, I have to stop producing. I have to just stop, and I have to focus everything on getting to a place where I'm writing and directing. And my last producing job, I overheard one of my staff, my coordinator, was talking about. Uh, it sounded like he was closing a deal for distribution on a film, which, we were doing a supermarket commercial, so that intrigued me. And then I asked him what he was doing, and he said he's a feature producer on the side as well. And I was like, well, what are you doing working for me? And he was like, because you pay more than a than independent feature producing.
Yeah.
Working commercial is better. So I was like, oh, okay. And so we had a meeting and we talked about some projects I had that I've been trying to get going. And I remember it was very much kind of that old school positive vibe. He just said like, okay, well, this is the first day um, on the march towards making your feature. Like we're
Yeah.
gonna get this thing made. And it was just a different attitude um, than I had been experiencing in New York. And I love New York deeply, and I'm back in New York. But at the time when I was there, I really felt like there was a lot of like, your success is my failure. That's what I was running into. And
Mm.
so there weren't a lot of people like reaching down with hands to pull me up. So, and so we made a feature in Austin, two-step, available everywhere. I think it's available in Europe as well, and England and the UK. Um, and that started it. I think the next I got an insanely wonderful review in the Hollywood Reporter. Uh, I remember I hired a publicist at South by Southwest, which you really have to do because otherwise you just disappear
Mhm.
in kind of the sea of films. And she said you have to rent a theater in Los Angeles for the big names to come watch your movie because the way people review at South by Southwest is they watch a movie and then they go in the hallway and they type out a 200-word review and they send it to their editor. You want a thoughtful review. And I was like, I mean, I called around. I think I got like a $250, like some ridiculous friend rate from someplace. And I still wasn't sure if I was going to do it. And they're like, you got to do this. So I did it. I mean, at that point, every dime was important. I did it. We invited, I think, 10 journalists. One showed up, Jeff Berkshire from the Howard Reporter, and he wrote like a 1,500-word, thoughtful, praising, deep review because he had the time to do it. That printed, the day our film premiered at South by, and so it was the greatest. I mean, literally, that renting that theater
Yeah.
probably got my career started if we didn't have that review. And then so that started after that. I wrote, got representation and all that. And and after 10 years in Austin, we came back here. I just the joke during COVID, the idea was to keep moving west to LA eventually, but during COVID, just further from family, and our child is an only child, and idea of being away, to moving further from the East Coast seemed ridiculous. So we were either going to stay in Austin or go back to New York. And at one point, I was thinking about COVID and everything, and just being in Texas, and I was missing New York terribly, and I went up to my wife's office and I just said, I don't know what my life story is, but the last line of it cannot be, and then he died in Texas.
Yeah.
uh,
That that's a good film right there.
it is, and then he died in Texas. Um, so yeah, so then we just started talking about going out, and I was already writing Brooklyn Motto at the time. I was deep in the past,
Mm.
thinking about the past. Also, like my wife and I would have really heavy conversations about, are we mythologizing our experience in New York, like, going back to the city, 10 years older. Um, but I'm from here. So for me it is home. I like the city, we probably won't stay in the city, forever. But I'm happy to be back. Um, but yeah, and so then we're back and we're here. I've written features that have not been made, as I already touched upon.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's great to write for a living. It's pretty special to be able to do that. Um, but I told my wife after I wrote the book, and in a brief moment of confidence, uh, that I kind of feel like the book is the novel, and this type of writing is what I should have been doing the whole time in some ways.
Yeah.
I feel like I got to it late, but it feels right. I'll keep doing the screenplay work, but it feels right now.
Have you ever noticed when it comes to writing and ideas that something starts to get a sense of urgency, and it's almost like a panic set if you don't start the project and don't start writing it down, and then it kind of just, okay, this is what I'm doing now until it's done, and then kind of you finish and you're just like, it's like a weight has lifted off your shoulder and you're done now.
I feel depression when it's gone. I
Okay.
feel when I'm out of the world, you know? I mean, if I'm that in it, I generally I fall in love with my characters, and I want to be in that world. And so I have a little bit of a mourning period
Yeah.
actually. Um, but then it's like anything, and then the next idea comes, or sometimes the next idea comes as I'm reaching the natural end of the previous, and
Yeah.
that's almost the one of the sparks that I was like, okay, I'm almost done, because some part of my brain is released from this project and is thinking, what's the next
Yeah.
project? But I do, I never, I mean, now that I'm older, you always think you have so much time, and I have my documents of ideas, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to get to all these. I'm not going to get to
Mm.
all these probably, and I never thought about that until recently. And then you're just like, well, I need to really focus on what's right to focus on. Um, but yeah, I mean, I love when there's nothing better than when you're in that world and it's flowing, and you're smiling and you're saying lines out loud while you're typing them, and you're surprised at what comes out of characters' mouths.
Yeah.
That's the magic that I love.
It's it might be slightly off, but you were saying like you were in Texas, and but there's a part of you that's just like, no, New York is where I belong. It's when you're kind of immersed in that project, it feels, regardless of what's going on in the project or what the character's doing, it just, no, I'm comfortable. This is where I am. This is where I should be.
Yeah. Yeah, Texas, we enjoyed our time in Austin. The city changed while we were there. It's a very rich, young city now, and when we moved there, it was changing already, but it still had a little bit of the funky, kind of quirky, homegrowny type vibe. I guess the keep Austin weird thing, but also genuine. It's filled with such genuine people. Um, but when we left New York, we didn't want to move to a city that we could compare to New York,
Yeah.
because I felt like it would never have a fair shot. I would always just be like, this place is not what. And then Austin started to, people would disagree, but it started to turn into a big city, and
Yeah. No, I know
a
what you mean.
fast city that culturally wasn't really my vibe. I, 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 I really enjoyed the people, and the filmmaking community there is superb. I loved the filmmaking community, and I was embraced by them. And, you go to the Austin Film Society, and Linklater's there. It's his theater, but he's there because he wants to see a movie. It's just lovely, kind of charming in that way. But at the same time, it just started to change, and just COVID really. I mean,
Yeah.
death and illness started to make me think about, what was, where did I want to get old?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But that's what I mean, because
the
it's suddenly you realize where you belong.
mhm.
and you're just
Yeah,
like,
and it's and it and I'm happy that we're here now. My son is given, there's a great the public school system here in New York can be tricky. You have amazing opportunities if you're able to get into certain schools, and he was lucky enough to get into an art school, and he's studying drama, and he would not have been able to have that chance, anywhere else in the United States, as far as I know, for a great public education. Um, but and I'm happy we're here now. I don't know if he'll stay. I don't know if we'll stay, but it's doing what it's supposed to do for us now. And I feel creatively inspired. I when I first got to Texas, I was
mm,
feeding off all the Texas stuff. Everything I was writing was Texas, 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 and it was just fascinating to me as an East Coaster, as an outsider. Places like Texas are, there are few places in the United States where we believe in folklore or mythology, where because it seems a little cloudy as an outsider. And Texas is one of those places you can kind of get away with some wild stuff narratively, as well as, New Orleans and things like that. So I loved it and I fed off of it, and then I just kind of hit a wall. And I just missed, I also missed the cultural aspect of a bigger city, going to plays, going to museums, and, you know, walking around, and just the people watching and all that stuff. It feeds. You're a writer as well, and it's just like, so much of our life is just in here, and we just and I want to be in society, but I kind of don't at the same time
yeah,
because I'm
yeah. No,
watching.
I know what you mean.
you know
Yeah,
so it's like you can be uh together but alone in New York. you
yeah,
know
yeah. I'm with you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You can
so
shut the door, but it's all
yeah,
behind the door. But so
yeah. When you
we should probably actually mention the book.
Oh, yeah, yeah, Brooklyn Motto.
Hmm.
His book, available. I believe it is worldwide, so yeah, it's available. But yeah, so it's a take on, first person detective noir, but it's also about being 28 years old. It's
Yeah,
about kind of time in your life when you are going from reactive to active, from passive to kinetic, where things aren't happening to you. You have to decide to do things and go out in the world. And so the protagonist is a detective that kind of hates his job, kind of got it, by accident, and is kind of presented with the choice of, do you do it? Do you engage it? Or do you become a detective, or do you not, through what happens in the book? But yeah,
did you say it was 1988 New York?
1998, yeah, in New York. Yeah.
1998 New York.
1998. So it's Giuliani. I don't know how much that means to outside of the United States, but Giuliani era New York was a strange, time to be in New York. It was the
Was he the mayor that was attributed with cleaning New York up?
he was, but he did that also through, um, programs called like Stop and Frisk,
Mm.
where cops could just say, "You look questionable. I'm gonna pat you down."
Yeah,
Um, they typically did that to anybody that wasn't white. He had a notorious cabaret law license where you had to pay a license to the city to have dancing at your club. I mean, I'd be in bar I was in bars where the police would raid because people were dancing. And
yeah.
or they'd present some ridiculous fine. But it was an era of kind of like, well, if you want the city to be clean, you've got to let the cops do whatever they want. That was there was no kind of compromise in there.
My brother and I were talking about the police today, actually, and we were talking about the different ways that we've been pulled over by the police. And there was two particular experiences, which I kind of won't go into, but it is police have an absolute right to do their job. Um, but and I can talk from personal experience. There's something you have in the UK that is called an appropriate adult, and that for children who are under 18 but aren't in social services, but their parents are not interested, or they have some form of vulnerable need. You can ask an appropriate adult to sit in, or you should by law have an appropriate adult sit in the interview room with them to act as their legal guardian. So although you will have a solicitor or a legal rep, you should also have somebody that is not connected that can act as an appropriate adult. And I've done that as a volunteer role, and I've done over probably 1,000 hours in interviews. And there are, we was talking about our experiences of being pulled over by traffic police and stuff like that. There's always two types. There's people that are just trying to get a rise out of you, trying to nick you for something you haven't done, and those that are just doing their job as a professional police officer. And I think that's probably that element with the mayor and the police is the principles of what he was trying to achieve is what everybody wanted. How some of it was achieved was what nobody asked for. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, my father, I mean, I think like, you know, my father was, like I said, an FBI agent. And so it's law enforcement. It's different. It's federal, but, I met plenty of FBI agents, and I believe my father is a decent man. But I met plenty that I found to be decent, wonderful people, and I met some that I couldn't believe they carried a gun,
yeah, yeah,
and it's just kind of the way it is. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to touch upon that in some ways, but the other thing is, I think there are other things that were happening at the time that were like, I think quotas really were kicked in then for the
yeah,
police in terms of things, and so they'd go to parks and they'd put a brand new bicycle, lean it against a wall,
yeah.
and if you touched it, you got arrested. And it was like, yeah, you just tried to steal that bike. And it was like, I don't know, I just walked up to it. I'm just touching it. What are you talking about? So just all that kind of that made people just
No, because that's a really good point, though, because on one hand, like I said, I can picture, and I'm possibly being too generous to the process, but you can picture people sitting in a room saying, how do we incentivize these police to be in the community looking for crime? Right, we're going to set a quota that you guys have to demonstrate you are actually walking around on the beat looking for things. So then someone else comes up, we could entrap people. That'll get the quota up. And you're like, no, that's not what we intended. And I don't know
and then
that
the
that's
other guy
what.
says, but okay, we won't entrap them, but we'll just put a bike out, and if they touch it, we'll arrest them. And they're like, see, that's the phrasing we need.
Yeah,
But
and
I,
it's
I
I'm always curious as to what was the idea and how was it delivered.
mhm.
Because like you say, the idea if
The-
go on.
I was just going to say the thing with the Mullen Commission, it's mentioned in the book, the Mullen Commission was the commission that Dinkins, the previous mayor, initiated, and it was kind of the heir to the Serpico investigation, into corruption. And Mayor Dinkins put together a bunch of people, usual suspects of priests and rabbis and community leaders, and they sat there and they tried to come up with ways to reduce not just police corruption, but also increase positive views of
Yeah,
police, right? The number one thing they came up with was police should live where they're policing, or at least in the borough, at least in the 20-mile area around where or in the city. What we have in New York is so many of our police force live in Long Island, they live in the suburbs, and they don't live in the community. And so they have almost I'm
yeah,
generalizing,
of course.
but there's almost like a prison guard mentality to, like, going into the prison looking for crime, as opposed to being in the community and trying to support the community and uplift the community or protect the community. Giuliani rejected, when he came into office, the Mullen Commission, rejected all their findings, created a new commission where he picked the priest and he picked the rabbi and he picked the community leaders, and they came up with the same exact list of things that they think the police should be doing. And Giuliani then rejected that.
Yeah.
Because it started with making the police a part of the community they're policing, and that was just deemed impossible. I don't know what the actual reasoning at the time was, but I still think, and I think most people, if the police lived in the community they were policing, it'd be a lot different. I think in terms of
Would
how we look at them, how they look at us.
Well, I think the bike is a perfect example, right? A police officer's job is to arrest somebody if they break the law, not to create a temptation or suggestion that you should break the law so I can arrest you. And it's a subtle difference,
Yeah.
but the outlook to that is massive, because if my job is, as a police officer, to notice the law is being broken, then my job is to arrest you because you've broken the law. But if that's my only focus, have you broken the law right now? If the answer is no, maybe you and I can have a conversation before anything escalates, and then we both go along and do our day. Like the typical one is
Yeah.
the delivery driver who's just trying to drop something off for 5 minutes and he gets a ticket. It's like, dude, come on, that $50 ticket that's cost me half a day's wages. Do you know what I mean? Whatever it is. Whereas the police officer that lives there in that apartment block isn't going to ticket his own delivery driver. He's just going to be like, "How's your day going? Are you all right? Is that for me?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I remember specifically during this era, my experience with it. I mean, I had friends that had heavier experiences, and in the book, there's this kind of not shadow organization, but kind of like clandestine division of the mayor's office that kind of pays off people when there's incidents that of police overreach, which exists and which in generally is done publicly for the horrible things. But I had friends that had minor issues and were given some sort of payoff. But I remember walking down Broadway, and I'm downtown, I'm right around NYU. It's a beautiful Saturday, and I'm walking down Broadway, and this 22-year-old white guy in a tucked in shirt and looking clean and fresh just walks right up to me, and he just goes like, "Hey, do you know where I can get some weed?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't, whatever, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
We're 2 blocks from Tompkins Square Park. I mean, we're 2 blocks from Washington Square Park. Like, just walk through. Everyone's going to say Coke smoke to you at some point, just like, and he's like, "Well, I've never done this before. Can you help me?" And I was like, I'm like, and we're walking, and he's walking with me. And he's so obviously a cop, right?
Yeah.
He's so obviously like a young police officer. And I'm just like, "Buddy, like, I know you're just like, you're doing your job and everything, but I'm going to meet somebody for brunch, and, I'm not going to walk and help you buy weed and then have you arrest me, like I'm not dumb." And he just kept pushing and kept pushing. And then we walked, and then we both turned the corner together, and there was a little gaggle of 5 policemen waiting there, and I was just like, uh-huh, yeah, but the amount of energy they put into trying to get me to say
Yeah.
like, "Yes, I know where to purchase weed. Yes. Oh, I have weed on me. I'll sell it to you." It was like I said no, and I was trying to walk away, and they just stuck with me for a block. Just, it's just,
And that's that thing, isn't it?
it was a weird time.
You could just go down to the park and see who's going Coke or smoke.
Yeah. 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 And I remember the first time I was in New York. I was walking, the first time I was in New York, I was in Central Park, and this guy, I was like, as an adult, I was like 19 or something, 20, barely. And I'm walking through the park, and this guy, mumbles something to me. And I was going to college in Vermont, so I'm operating at a different
Yeah.
speed than New York at the time. I'm country living. And he said something to me, and I didn't hear what he said, and I felt rude because I didn't say anything back. And I turned to him, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And he goes, "I said Coke smoke." And I was like, "Oh, no, I'm fine." Like
Yeah. Courtesy.
it was just it was such yeah. I didn't know that what was happening. Uh, but yeah, it was such a part of that era. Just you couldn't walk through a park without somebody saying "Coke smoke," to you. So the fact that this policeman was a block from the park
It's just
was
crazy, isn't it? It
ridiculous.
is crazy. Just lastly, and it's a completely random question that has no relation to anything. I want you to imagine you have a time machine. The time machine is a car of your choice. So you can have any car you want.
Mm.
What would the car be?
Yeah.
Where would you go? And
Mhm.
what's playing on the radio?
Okay. It might all be tied to it might all be tied to family. Um,
Anything you want.
the car would probably be a Carmen Ghia
Okay.
that my parents, when they were at the height of their youth and beauty, had when my dad was stationed in Germany. I believe he had, or yeah, I think he got it in Germany and shipped it back. I'm not sure but there are just photos of the two of them in this Carmen Ghia. And, it's that time when you look at the concept of me is nowhere in their eyes. They're just
Life is still good
in the
for them.
moment. They're, yeah, exactly. They're young and beautiful and so excited about the wind in their hair in this Carmen Ghia convertible. Um, and then I would probably, and then so that would be the car. I'm not sure about, I'll think about the music for a second. I would probably want to go to Ecuador to see one of to see my mom and her sister and my abuela, my grandmother, when they were visiting.
Yeah.
They used to take steamboats,
Oh,
steamships from New
yeah.
York down to Ecuador. Because we still have a farm in Ecuador. We still have a family farm there. And so they would go down there. And I've only seen, a handful of pictures of that existence, so I'd love to see kind of like late 1940s Ecuador, that kind of life. Musically, you know, so much of the book is about, there's the dead father in the book, um, and the mother isn't really present. The mother's alive, but she's not really present in the book. And, my mother died in 2003, and part of the book is an investigation into, I think, myself, because there are less people that can answer questions
Yeah.
about who I am. It's getting down to just basically me, at
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah.
And the mother is and the mother is kind of absent in the book, mostly because I don't have questions I can ask my mother. So I didn't, as I was figuring this character out, I don't know, it felt odd having a mother present. I feel better about it in the next book, but um so I don't know, I keep going back to who's not with me, and that's her really. And I would probably maybe like Wings.
Yeah.
She loved Wings,
Hmm.
like I still have very distinct memories of her singing, um, whatever was it, someone's knocking at the door, someone's ringing the bell, like that, just
Yeah.
in the house. And probably listen to something like that, think about the past and, trying to learn about who you are through your relatives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's important. It is important. Alex, that's been brilliant.
That'd be it.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was a
Thank
fun
you.
conversation.
Thank you. And there you go. That's Alex and I talking about all things film and writing. And I do think there's a self torture in that process. everybody who writes, directs, produces anything that's creative, there's a torture involved. There really is, because you want it to be successful, but then there's imposter syndrome. So have some sympathy, but do please check out the links in the description and check out the book, check out Alex's work. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for the support. And wherever you are from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.